Public speaking can benefit you in every aspect of your life, your personal life, your educational life, and your professional life, as well as any areas of recreation. If you're able to communicate effectively, you'll be able to achieve goals you didn't think were possible. You'll feel more confident. You'll be able to make better structured arguments. You'll be able to make a lasting impression on people that is a good impression. And this course is designed to help you accomplish those things. You'll be able to take the knowledge and experiences from this course and apply them in every area of your life for as long as you live. That's one of the reasons this course is so important that it's included in the core for almost every university in the United States and the Western world. A speech begins with a message. It begins with an idea of what do I want to communicate to this audience at this particular situation, this particular point in time. So a speech consists of your outline or your text of the speech, and it's designed in a way to elicit a desired response. You have a message you want to get across. You design your message in such a way that your audience will receive that message. Then you rehearse and then deliver the speech. Delivery is what most people think of when we think of a speech. That is one component of the speech. Organization and critiques are other elements. So after the delivery, you would critique your own speech. What did I do well? Where can I improve for next time? And if you've done enough rehearsal, the answer should be, wow, I did that pretty well. And by the end of this class, you should be able to say that every time you get in front of someone and make a presentation or deliver a speech. When we think of the organization of a speech, it consists of these elements, and I'll try to break these down in a little bit of detail. But the first thing we need to do is grab your audience's attention, draw them in, tell them something that makes their ears perk up. The thesis statement is the thesis for your entire speech. Included with that, we give a preview of our main points. So these are considered the introduction of your speech, the attention grabber, the thesis statement, and the preview. The preview tells us what your main points are going to be. Then the body of the speech comes next. That's where you present the main points, but you present them in more detail, and you include evidence to support the ideas that you're presenting with your main points. In the summary of your speech, you reiterate what your main points were. You tell us what you told us. And then at the very end, you leave the audience with a clincher. The clincher is something that usually ties back to the beginning of the speech, but it's something memorable, and it's something that will help connect the audience to the material they just heard. It makes it easier for the audience to remember what you just told them. And throughout the speech, we also have what are called audience relevance links. Audience relevance links, or audience relevance material, as your textbook may call it, refer to instances in which you engage the audience specifically. Simple things such as inclusive language can be considered audience relevance links. Anything that makes the material hit home to your audience is an audience relevance link. Even such simple things as saying we instead of I, or our instead of my, that makes the audience feel like you're talking about them. That's an audience relevance link. And transitions are another important element of a speech. When we go from one main point to another main point, we need a transition that kind of summarizes or wraps up what we just said and moves us to the next main point. Those are called transitions. Communication is the process of sending and receiving messages to create shared meaning. Messages are verbal and nonverbal. In the sense of a public speech, we usually think of the speech as being verbal, and yet there are many nonverbal messages that we communicate. Our posture, our tone of voice, our gestures. Do we look confident? Do we look nervous? All of those things are messages that our audience will pick up on. And we need to be aware of those things while we're delivering the speech. It's one of the important reasons we rehearse our speeches. Let me take this time to remind you that public speaking is not a performance. You're not memorizing a speech. You're not reciting lines as if you were in a play. You're not reading a speech. You're delivering your speech extemporaneously, which means without reading and without memorization. Sure, you may memorize most of what you want to say, but you're not trying to get through it like reciting lines from a play. You can rehearse your speech well enough that you can say it by memory, but you're not trying to recite it from memory. You're just trying to remember what your main points are and why they're so important, and then how you can illustrate those main points so that your audience gets the message. So, communication is not a one-way street. It's a dynamic process. That means it's fluid and changing. And it involves the sender, that's the person who originally sends a message, then you have a message. The medium is the channel or channels through which the message is sent. A receiver is someone in your audience who decodes the words and the messages that you're sending, and then the receiver gives feedback to the original speaker, so the receiver essentially sends messages back. Effective public speaking has been studied for millennia, but as social sciences originated in the early 20th century, scholars started studying communication using those methods. And one of the things they came up with was this notion that communication happens in a linear process. One person sends a message to others. In communication studies, we refer to this as the magic bullet theory or the hypodermic needle theory. This implies that everyone receives the message in the same way. But in this model of communication, which you'll see, the speaker, who is the sender of the message, encodes a message. That means you put together the words in a way that they create meaning that you can share with your audience. Then you send that message through a channel or a medium, and if we're imagining giving a speech, that channel would be air molecules vibrating as our voice boxes vibrate. As we project our voice, invisible air molecules move through the air in airwaves, and then they reach our ears and they vibrate, and our ears translate those vibrations into sounds, and our brain deconstructs those sounds. The listener is the receiver of the message. So we have a sender who sends a message across a channel, and then the receiver listens or decodes the message to receive meaning from that speech. Now, we talked about feedback before, so which of these elements was not in the linear model? Feedback. All right, so feedback is important. If I'm just sending a message but not listening or caring what my audience thinks, there's a higher chance my message will fall on deaf ears. It will not achieve the desired effect that I hoped for when I designed and delivered the message. So we have to have feedback, and we have to be able to correctly interpret the feedback of our audience. So scholars came up with what's called the interactive model of communication. In this case, the sender or the speaker sends a message through channels that goes to the receiver, and then the receiver in turn becomes a speaker sending back signals. I like to use this example. When I'm speaking as a teacher in a classroom, I can read people's feedback. Some of the feedback I receive is verbal and some is nonverbal. If students are sitting there like, I usually think, okay, they're getting it. If they're sitting there like, then probably I need to repeat it, slow down, back up, explain myself again. Sometimes I've heard this in other people's classes. The students go like this sometimes. I've never seen this in my classes, but sometimes students reportedly go like this. Never happened in my classes. Now, one of the things we recognize is that not all messages... Say hi, buddy.
Hi.
Okay. I gotta do this, honey. You gotta go. I can.
Petaluma Pumas.
Yeah, Petaluma Pumas. All right. Now go stay over there, honey. All right. So one of the things that scholars realize is that in addition to the receiver sending back messages to the original sender, we also have problems with message reception, and part of that is due to interference. And there are there's two forms of interference that we identify. Internal interference is one. Maybe I'm trying to talk about something, but my mind is somewhere else. Maybe I'm having some kind of family problem, a relationship problem, or health issue. Maybe I'm just really hungry, and so my mind is focused on something else. I'm trying to speak, but something inside me is interfering with my ability to effectively communicate my message. Now, internal interference can also happen for you, the listeners, the receivers. What if you're thinking about, I'm sitting here in this speech class listening to this guy go on, and I've got a science test after this. I've got a major quiz in my organic chemistry class coming up, and it's worth 50% of my grade. I wish I was there studying for that. So that's a form of internal interference. You're hungry. You have to go to the bathroom. You're having a fight with your boyfriend or girlfriend. All of those things are internal interference that interfere with the ability to correctly receive a message, an intended message. Okay, so external interference is interference that comes from outside sources. This could be something along the lines of what happens in classes at the University of Detroit Mercy, lawnmowers outside the windows. We usually have the windows open at the end of the summer and in the fall, and inevitably somebody's driving a power mower outside the window making noise. That interferes with my ability to speak the message to you and your ability to hear the message. Now, if we're doing this online, a prime example of external interference would be a loss of Wi-Fi signal, or the power goes out, or there's some problem with my recording. My voice has a glitch or something. Those are all examples of external interference that comes from outside of us. But there's another model that describes the context of public speaking, and that is called the transactional model. In that transactional model, think about the original sender as one participant in a communication process. If we think about a transaction, think about a business transaction. In a transaction, somebody gives somebody something, and in return, they get something else. So the speaker, the original speaker, simultaneously sends and receives messages, both verbal and nonverbal, through multiple channels, dealing with internal and external interference. The receivers do the same thing. They become senders and receivers at the same time. So we're simultaneously sending and receiving messages if this is a transaction. In a business transaction, I might be buying a car. So I receive a car, and in return, I give you money, all right, or any other product that we might be buying. So we both receive something of value, something that we want to get. So a public speaker wants to get his or her message across, and the receivers want to learn something new, and they want to get their message back to the original sender. So it's a transaction. We're all involved, we're all participating, we're all cooperating to share meaning and build meaning together. Another element that comes into the transactional model is called the communication situation. Every situation is different. You would not give the same speech at a wedding toast that you would give at a eulogy. A wedding and a funeral, two totally different situations. And a good speaker assesses the situation and determines what is expected for that situation, and then designs and delivers a message to meet those expectations. So we identify 7 elements of the communication process, and they are the situation, the sender, the message, the receiver, and then we talk about channel, feedback, and interference. The channel is the medium through which you communicate. One of the things that we need to focus on is the message. So the message is what you say, but it's not just what you say, it's also how you say it. How do I get my point across? What am I trying to convey, and how do I get it across? What words do I choose? How do I choose my message? How do I choose to organize my speech? There's lots and lots of ways to do it, and the way to do it depends largely on who your audience will be. Um, Receivers, every receiver has a frame of reference. What is your point of view? Where are you coming from? And we need to realize this. People are not just the same. Not everybody has the same reference point that you do. We need to understand that. So we have to analyze our audience. We'll actually do an exercise as part of your persuasive speech in which you actually have to formally survey your audience to find out where they stand on the issue that you're going to be talking about. So we analyze our audience and determine how do we build our message based on that audience. One of the things we want to do is avoid marginalizing our audience, which is where we leave out or ignore the needs of a group that is within our audience. It could be a minority group. It could be a group that is otherwise excluded from normal and common discourses on whatever topic that is. So we want to not marginalize our audience. We want to keep our audience and include everyone. We also want to avoid what's called ethnocentrism, which is where we kind of assume that our way of doing things is the best, and we ignore or criticize other ways of doing things. This is based on our ethnicity or our nationality. Well, we've always done it this way in America. That's how we do it here. That's a form of ethnocentrism. And why would they do it like that in those other countries? That's a form of ethnocentrism. So discussing those things and pointing out merits and flaws is fine, but simply assuming that our way is best, that is ethnocentrism. One of the things you need to be aware of as a speaker is that your audience members have different ways of learning. There's different learning styles, and different audience members have those different styles. So if you can incorporate something in your speech that appeals to each of these stages, you'll be an effective communicator, and you'll be more likely to reach all the people in your audience instead of just people who like to think, or people who like to watch, or people who like to feel. If you can try to get something in your speech that appeals to each of these groups, you're more likely to have an effective speech. How do we become an ethical public speaker? What is involved there? There are several things we need to take into consideration. Number one, think about your topics and your goals. Are those ethical goals? Most of the time on the surface we would think, oh yeah, I'm an ethical person. I just want good things for others. But sometimes those things that you think are good, other people might disagree with that. We need to take that into consideration. It's still ethical if you're convinced about it, if you do it in an ethical way. And one of those ways is to acknowledge your biases. One of the ways to be ethical is to acknowledge your biases. If you're giving a speech, for example, on the death penalty, and you're against the death penalty, you can acknowledge, yes, I'm against the death penalty. My dad is a defense lawyer, and he's seen this. So you've grown up with these biases of hearing about these abuses of the justice system. All right? Or let's say you're giving a speech to persuade someone to buy a stock or invest in something. You have to acknowledge, yes, I'm a part owner of this company, and if this stock goes up, I'm going to make lots of money on it. So acknowledging those biases is important. Another thing we need to do is acknowledge our sort. Hi, buddy. Thought you were going to go downstairs and play. Another thing we need to do is choose our evidence wisely. Choose credible evidence that comes from good, quality, believable sources. We'll talk much more about this as we go on, but this is important for being ethical as a speaker. And you must include evidence that contradicts what you say. If it's good evidence, you have to acknowledge it. And then we also have to acknowledge where we got our materials. We have to give citations. We have to tell people where we got this. We report our sources of information. Where did you hear that? Oh, there, okay. And plagiarism. We must never plagiarize. If there's anything that's not our own words or ideas, give credit to the source from which it originated. Otherwise, this constitutes plagiarism, which is one of the most serious forms of academic fraud that we have, academic dishonesty. One of the ways we acknowledge our sources is through oral footnotes. So we tell our audience, and I learned this from the Journal of Nature or whatever, the Journal of Science or whatever journal we're citing as one of our sources. So if you tell people where you got the information from, number one, they're more likely to believe it, and number two, you are providing evidence that you're an ethical speaker.